All right, internet, welcome back. So Natas 23. This is the 23rd. We're almost done. We're almost to 30. I think there's only 30. There might be a little bit more than that. We'll see. Anywho, Natas 23 is plain and simple. You know, they like to keep it minimalistic. Not much going on here. So if I refresh this and hopefully get it back to a state where this is what it looks like when you log in. You have a password, an input field, and a login button, and you have your source code, obviously, as usual. So with this setup, as usual, didn't know what I was doing, and I cheated, but I learned a lot, and I'm going to share it with you. I'm going to share it with you because I care about you. And, okay, cool. Let's jump into it. So I saw this input field and I was like, all right, let's put some stuff in here. I'm going to put some AS. Enter. That's wrong. Okay. How about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, blah, blah, blah. Nope. Okay, so what if we try to do a command? Oh, that's not. Semicolon. We'll try to string a command together, and that's wrong too. So we can see that that's wrong, but also in the URL section, we also can see that there is a option here that states password or password. And password is basically the key that has the associated value, which is the value that we're inputting in this field. So that is what I know, and that's what I can see. But that's about all I knew, so I had to cheat as per usual. So I am going to show you the source code, but before I do that and walk you through the solution, I'm actually going to show you that NOJ GitHub, they did another good job at explaining the solution, and they linked out some interesting things to solve the issue or solve the problem. But once I actually read their answer, it's very short. They just have this text here, and that's basically it. They have the source code. So I actually did a lot of reading into PHP and some of the flaws in the code itself. And what we're actually doing within this specific challenge is we're exploiting a flaw within the PHP code base itself, because there's weird and wacky things that happen within machines, specifically if the code is strictly or loosely typed. And PHP is considered a very accessible language where a lot of people can learn it, but at the same time, when you have something that's accessible, that also leads to sometimes things that are not as strict and rigid as they should be when someone's trying to poke and prod and find flaws in what you've created. So with that kind of philosophical statement out of the way, I'm going to jump into the source code, and then I'm going to show you some resources I found, and then we will solve the problem. So the source code is here, and one fun fact I found out that I didn't realize, that in Firefox and Chrome, and I'm assuming all Chromium browsers, they actually give you the code coloring for you inside of the text document. I didn't know that. That's awesome. But in Brave they don't, because apparently they've created their own Chromium browser. But I threw it into here again as usual. So with the code, as always we can ignore the top piece. We don't need to look at that, and I'm just going to remove it because we don't need it. And the bottom piece we don't need because that's not relevant. So we're just going to look at the section here. We're going to look at this piece, and in here, that's interesting. Yeah. Oops. Okay. There. Cool. So we're going to focus on the PHP piece. So we have our form, and our input field is basically the password. That's it. And you can see that the size limit is apparently set to 20. And this is basically the key associated to our value for the input field. But here's what we need to look at. And first things first, I got to point this out because the person that created this challenge has a good sense of humor or a good taste in movies. But here you can see there's a comment of Morla. So I Googled, I was like, what the hell is Morla? And what does that have to do with this? And it has absolutely nothing to do with this. But if you Google Morla, you'll come across this great movie called The Never Ending Story. And there's a character in there called Morla, which is a giant turtle. I'm going to mute this so I don't get, in trouble by the YouTube gods. But you can see that giant turtle right there. See it? I'm going to fast forward it. See? Huge turtle. I loved this movie when I was a kid. It's a great movie. And this is a great illustration of a piece of art that somebody drew of Morla, which I thought was great. I'm going to share that with you as well. And then also, apparently, Morla is also a river, a 16-kilometer long river. in Italy. Fun fact. But I thought that was cool that they put that in there, little gemstone for us to see, a little nugget. Anywho, let's get to the challenge. So in here you can see that basically to get the answer to the challenge, we need to put in an input into the request field, which is the input field, and we need to put in the password, which we've already seen. And the password has to consist of I love you, all lowercase, no spaces. And in addition to that, it's basically asking, okay, if I love you is in the password and the password itself is longer than 10 characters, I want you to print out the password. So if you're not capable of counting like myself, you can see that this is actually 2, 4, 6, 8 characters and not 10. So how do we add additional characters to this without messing up the I love you piece? Well, if we come back here and try to play around with this like I did originally, I said, okay, well, if I do I love you, and you can see some of my attempts here of trying to like change the size of the document, or what's considered the size. And I also tried to add some numbers and things around it. So if we say I love you 100, 1000, it says it's wrong. What if I say I love you underscore, 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 underscore? Still wrong. So within PHP, there's a specific thing called strict versus loose comparisons in PHP. And this is actually a super good article. I definitely recommend reading this because they link out to some really good resources and they explain it in a way that I understood it, which is amazing. So that means obviously they explained it in a simple way. And with strict and loose comparisons, PHP can sometimes interpret strings as integers and integers as strings. So if I scroll down a bit here, you'll see kind of what I'm getting at here. So if you see this here where basically they're comparing a string to an integer, let me zoom in here a bit. So you can see they're comparing a string to an integer, and this string plus this integer actually outputs 7. So it's interpreting the string as an integer, and the integer it's interpreting it as is 0. And if you do 40th plus 7, you're going to get 47. What's happening here is it's actually interpreting the string as an integer of 40, and then it's adding that to 7, giving you 47. Now, the interesting thing about this is that this is specific to PHP, this specific flaw, but there are many flaws like this through different code bases, either in the programming language itself or just incorrect development by the engineer themselves. So specifically, we're going to take advantage of this flaw. And if I go down a bit further, you can see that the loose comparison within PHP specifically tends to be associated to 2 equal signs. And if we go down a bit further, you can see that basically they're giving another example here. This one's kind of convoluted, so I'll skip over that one. And then you can see that if I go a bit further, they give an example for a database in a real-world scenario why this is a big deal. But I wanted to show you the solution to fixing this for some developers, and that's actually strict comparisons. And they basically say to switch to strict comparisons as much as possible. And a strict comparison is basically doing 3 equal signs instead of 2. And there you're basically forcing a variable or an item into its original data type, either an integer, string, etc. So that was another interesting piece. Another way of actually solving this and fixing this issue is actually, this is on the PHP documentation, there was a mention of actually doing, let me find it, typecasting, which is something that's done in C, you can see here. And typecasting is basically when you're executing something with a specific data type, you actually typecast specifically what that data type is going to be before it actually has its execution of a comparison or whatever else. And here you can see we're basically typecasting this foo variable to be a Boolean data type. And you're typecasting that there, and you can see if you scroll down, there's a variation of different typecasts here where you can do typecasting for integers, Booleans, floats, etc. Now, I've explained kind of how to solve the issue. I've explained how to kind of what the issue is, but I'm not showing you the answer. So let's go to here and I'll show you the answer of what this would be. So if the code basically states that a 8-character string needs to be larger than a 10-digit integer, then how do we kind of meet those two meet those two kind of conditions? Well, you can actually just add 10 I love you to this character here, and it's going to give you wrong because it's not greater than 10. But if we say 11 I love you, It's going to give us our answer. Because we've exceeded 10, we've exceeded the digit of integer 10, and we also had I love you. And that's the solution there. Another interesting thing here I wanted to share. So type juggling is something you should read about. I thought it was quite interesting. Basically in the PHP documentation, they talk through why this is the case and some of the flaws within it. And there's actually a really good example here showing, if I zoom in a bit, the different situations that could happen for type juggling. So here you can see that basically this string is a string, this integer is an integer, but when you actually take a foo times 1.3, the foo, this foo here, the 2, it's going to actually take 2 times that. It's going to give you a float. So it's taking an integer and a float. And now this is where the interesting magic happens, where you take an integer, you compare it to a string, but that string actually has an integer at the beginning of it. It's going to automatically take that integer from the string and then multiply it by the other integer. Same thing applies here. It's going to do the same thing. But when I showed you previously, if you have a string here and then you put a number after it, it's actually going to interpret the string first before it gets to the number. So this whole piece right here is going to be considered a string, not an integer. But if you actually take this integer and put it at the beginning of the string, it's then going to interpret the integer first of that string, and then the whole thing turns into basically an integer that's being compared to another integer. So I hope that was semi-understandable. I thought it was pretty cool. Let's see if there's anything else I'm missing I want to share with you. Here's some other comparisons. So it's basically talking you through, this specific article in PHP actually talks through the numeric comparison for integers and strings. And this is another series of examples that provide good insight into what it looks like when comparing a string and an integer. And you can see that here, you can see that they've actually talked about the one I mentioned, where if there's a string at the beginning of this and you're comparing it to an integer, it's going to give you a type error. But if you swap that around and you put the integer in the front and the integer here, it's going to compare them. And it'll give you an E warning, but it's not going to stop the comparison. That's good stuff. And use a comparison table is another comparison table, which basically shows you how a specific comparison between two data types is evaluated. And they have a different one on loose comparisons, and they also have one for strict comparisons. And this was, I think this was jacked from somebody else that wrote this a long time ago, called Blue Shoes. He wrote this originally, or she. So anywho, that is the answer to Natas 23. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.